Hello, Traverse City Christian School community and others who are watching on Facebook, and just welcome to a new series that Traverse City Christian School is putting out, and it's called Your Turn. And the purpose of Your Turn is to just invite different guests to a conversation to provide perspective based on maybe their role or their position or job, and kind of how it's being affected or what they see the effects of COVID-19 and the different closures and shutdowns that are happening right now. So last week, we were able to have Congressman Jack Bergman on. He was able to provide a great perspective on some of the things going on at the national level, some of the work that he's been working on in DC, and what he sees going forward. And today we have two guests that we're going to have as part of this conversation, and both of them have just great experience and insights on a topic today that we'll kind of focus on a little bit more of maybe the social, emotional, spiritual side on how to process some of the things going on. So our two guests today, we have Anthony Weber, who is a pastor at Church of the Living God, and also is a Traverse City Christian School board member. And then we also have Terry Porter, who is an executive life coach from Health from the Inside Out, who works on life coaching and leadership training for different clients of his. So Anthony and Terry, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
First question that we're going to kind of talk on is, obviously each of our structures and especially our homes and families have been impacted in different ways, and it's maybe hard to get structure back into a family unit when a lot of it has kind of been jostled. And so just wondering, within each of your specific households or with your families, what ways have you been trying to make sure to stay intentional in providing structure, or what conversations have you had with your kids as you go through this? And Anthony, just wonder if you could start us off with that topic.
Yeah, first of all, I really want to thank Jack Bergman for being on. I think it must have been intimidating to know that Terry and I were going to be coming right after him. So I appreciate his boldness. Okay, so the guidelines in our house, or the kind of rhythms of our life, are pretty strict right now. You have to be up by noon. You have to have pants on by 1, and shower at least once a week, or if I can smell you. And so really that's all we've added. No, we haven't added anything new into our routine that I can think of, but we have started to do some other things that we probably should have been doing more of all along. We've started to do those things more. So two key things are game time together, and the second is mealtime, which I mean is kind of a given, I think, when we're stuck at home. But just having that opportunity to spend time together over food. And we've even done things like buy napkins that have go-to questions, because if any of you have raised boys, you know that not every meal time is flowing with conversation. So we have found some ways to get some extra conversation out of them. And I think all of us would say that we've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, great. Terry, similar experiences, or what things have you guys been intentional on?
Yeah, similar experience. We do get up earlier at our house because we have school to do, and so the kids have to get up by typically 8:30. So we are up a little bit earlier than the Weber family. But similar to what Anthony said, there wasn't many changes, but one of the things we noticed within the first 2 weeks is our activity level. We're not moving around as much. When you're in school, you're moving every hour from one side of the building to the other. It's not that big of a building, but still there's a lot more movement going on than here at the house. And so the benefit has been we haven't had the bad spring at all. There's been a couple rainy days, but we've been able to get out, take a walk around the block, play a game of catch in the yard. And that's the thing that we've been really intentional on. The other things we've been doing as a family, we try to have a family dinner almost every night, conversation around. I would say the other aspect that we have intentionally had, because the kids don't necessarily have a structured Bible class right now, and the class day is shorter, is we will have an intentional devotional time as a family. And I don't make it difficult or labor intensive. We read a psalm or a proverb together, and there's a couple thoughts about it, and then we get going right into the school day.
Mm-hmm. Just for either one of you, I guess, and you said some of the things that you're doing right now aren't maybe brand new. There are things that you're maybe doing, whether it's eating meals or playing games or going on hikes, but you're doing more of them. Are there aspects of how you've maybe structured family time now that you for sure want to hold on to more going forward? I know it's kind of maybe dependent on, as Terry said, different activities that kind of pull you in different directions too when things get lifted. But what do you see as being from this that you want to for sure keep within your family structure, even after, some of the restrictions are lifted?
That's a good question. And as I'm thinking through it, like I said earlier, it's not that we've necessarily introduced a new thing. We are just doing things we were doing before more purposefully.
Mm-hmm.
And so if anything follows from that, I'd like us to do that more purposefully. Now, the weather's changing. So, for example, game nights are going to turn into fishing nights, right? So, I mean, there's some of that natural progression of things. But as I think of going back into an equivalent time in the sense of what we're allowed to do, or the weather's similar so we can make a comparison, I do like that most evenings there was a purposeful point in the evening where we're either doing something or we're asking the boys, what are you doing? Would you like to do this? How was your day? Just more of a checking in. When school was going, I mean, this was right after basketball season. So we got out of a time where we were at, 3-4 nights a week. We weren't at home together for meals. Basketball season can be crazy. And so we had just come out of that when this stay at home kicked in. So it's even hard to think back to some of the other routines we had at that time because they had been on pause for an entire season of sports. But I think what's sticking with me is I've had a couple conversations with one of my boys where he had been longing to have serious conversation with my wife and I for a while. And this was my son who was away at college. And he had come home and he had been home and we just hadn't thought about it. And so finally, one night he said, I really want to spend time just talking with you guys. And so one of the things has been learning to pursue our boys relationally and not take certain things for granted, but just to take the time out to recognize we need to be crafting time, either forcing them to speak with napkins or just making sure they have opportunity. And we say, we want you to know that we see you. We don't know how you're experiencing this right now. How's it going for you? And that's probably not a bad principle for life. Even if we're no longer in the COVID thing, to stop on a regular basis and go, how are you experiencing life? I want to make sure I cling to that one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Again, very similar with Anthony. I think the key is, especially through this circumstance with COVID, we got to be fluid with how we do things. And so what we are doing in March is different than what we did in April, which is different than what we're doing in May. But the key thing, the foundational for us is always going to be relational. So we might have a movie night. It's based in relationship. We might have a family hike, but it's always based in relationship. It's about relating well with each other, working through the things of life. And so relationship, a healthy relationship was always going to be the foundation or the trump card for us on how we do things. If we're going to play a game, it's going to be relationship based. It's not going to be necessarily about the competition. Competition's good, but it's going to fuel a healthy relationship within our family.
Yeah, great.
So like boxing or something.
Boxing, exact. Well, you know what? We do some wrestling, and it's relationship based.
Yeah, on that, I would like to move that direction. I mean, we can have, work on the relationships face to face well within our homes and within our family units that we see much more often, than we did beforehand. But one thing that, is a big question coming out of this is obviously right now as a school, we're not meeting face to face. Churches, for the most part, are not meeting face to face. Now there's some restrictions being lifted this weekend that, would allow, for restaurant gatherings or meeting somebody at a coffee shop. But we haven't had that, for almost 2 months now, that face-to-face interaction in those different areas that we often, go to build on those relationships. And so, maybe Terry, if you could start here on, just because you brought up relationships, like how do you stay, connected well relationally with those that you can't normally, see face-to-face anymore? And maybe what potential long-term impacts over the next few months when everybody's kind of been used to either doing video Zoom meetings and trying to get back into that rhythm of being present with each other face to face.
Right. And Anthony, I'm sure you can attest to this as well as a pastor, but isolation is not good for folks. Isolation breeds all types of toxic behavior. At first, it starts in your own heart, your own soul, and it spreads out. I had a client a couple weeks ago, and it was a life coaching client, and they just shared with me they're really struggling with depression right now. And as we're talking and I'm asking some questions, one of the things I realized is there's an aspect of relationship that we are really missing out on. And I phrased it as secondary relationships. So it's the individual at the coffee shop that you see 2 or 3 times a week. You might not know their family, but you have this soft connection with them where there's a smile, there's a camaraderie that goes on. The person that you drop your dry cleaning off to, and again, they know you by name as soon as you walk in the door, and there's that friendship that is it's not a close for friendship, but it's a friendship nonetheless. You go to a favorite cafe, you go to a park, and you see the same folks there, even though you're not hanging out with them, at family functions. You do see them on a weekly basis, and all those secondary relationships have been removed. And then if we're not being purposeful in our primary relationships, and that was what was happening with this client, there's no primary relationships happening, and all the secondary relationships have been removed, and they found themselves in a deep depression. And so her homework assignment was simply reaching out to 5 people, her close friends, and just saying, "Hey, I'm really depressed," and just communicating that she's depressed, she doesn't know why, and just listening to what her friends say. Now, I say that I'm going to kind of get into the coaching role here. Don't you, when you do that, you have to let your friends know. Try not to fix me. Just be there with me in that moment. Just affirm that. Yeah, it's kind of depressing right now. She called me back the next day. She goes, "Terry, I had the best night of sleep ever in the past 2 months," and she goes, "I really believe it was because I just reached out to friends and said, hey, this is what's happening at my heart level. This is what's happening at my soul. I'm feeling down and depressed, and I think it's this." And she's been doing that, and the depression is down, even though we're 2 months into this COVID lockdown. So relationships are key, and we have to be purposeful. The other part of your question is, what do I do? I too am being purposeful in outside friendships, whether it's connecting with a Bible study and doing it in a Zoom time, making phone calls on a regular basis. Just a quick illustration from my personal life. About the first weekend, I was driving through town, coming back from the grocery store. I was just angry. I wasn't angry at anything in particular, but I just remember I was just really angry. And as I started processing my thoughts, I started realizing, I've been angry all day. I've been irritable all day. And I know my heart and I know my patterns enough in life that when I start feeling that way, it's my key to remind me to reach out to somebody. So I have a friend down in Battle Creek. He knows everything about me. And I just called him up. I said, "Hey, here's what's going on. I'm angry." He goes, "Well, good news. I'm not." And, we just had a fun conversation. And seriously, Tyler, it lasted 3 minutes. That's all the time we had was 3 minutes. And we had a great conversation for 3 minutes. I was able to share those negative feelings I had. Didn't know why I was having them. And at the backside, he's like, "You're just stressed right now, Terry. That's what it comes down to. You're just stressed because you're not sure what is happening through this process." And so that was a really good reminder for me to, again, stay committed to relationships. And that's why we've been doing that at our house as well, making sure everything we do is flowing through relationships. So,
yeah.
Terry, I really like your analogy of the secondary friendships. It's making me think of stabilizing muscles. Like if you go to lift
oh,
and all you do is the
right.
primary lift and you don't work the stabilizing muscles, you run into trouble. You have
Yeah.
to have them. I drove past a coffee shop that I frequent too often yesterday, and I realized I really missed the person behind the counter that I
Right.
saw too often. Um, because both of us, our eyes would light up because we recognized each other, and we don't have a meaningful relationship, but it was something that was important.
Yeah.
So, Tyler, I'm going to add something else to what Terry was saying. And this has to do with the electronic side of relationship. So Zoom or the equivalent has become kind of the go-to thing for people to manage to have face-to-face conversations or Facebook chat, things like that. And that creates its own set of problems. A lot of people, myself included, find those types of things fairly draining, especially if it's a large group of people. It's different with 3 people. This is super refreshing right now. But with a large group of people, you're trying to see all these different pictures and you're trying to read facial expressions and see emotions, and it's more exhausting than having the people in front of you. And so it's learning to use Zoom has brought its own set of challenges. The best Zoom meeting I had was when I was sitting one night. I think I was just playing on my phone and I got a message that my buddy wanted to Zoom with me. There was about 4 of us, and I don't think we ever even looked at each other. We just kept Zoom on, and every once in a while someone would go, "Hey, are you guys seeing this?" I forgot what was on TV, and it was an informal kind of chat. It was probably the best experience I had. So I wonder if things like this continue for a while, how creative we'll become in using those kinds of connections. One more thought, and then I will cede the rest of my time. So when Facebook was founded, the goal of Facebook, it started on college campuses. The goal was to unite diverse people. So they thought they would have this on a college campus, and here's college full of all kinds of different people, and they'll find each other online, and they'll develop this really wide, diverse group of friends on Facebook, and then in the real world, they'll continue these relationships. Well, they found out the exact opposite happened. Facebook became the place that divided people groups. They went on Facebook and found people that resonated with them, connected with them on Facebook, and then connected with them in real life. And it actually seemed to contribute more to divisiveness than it did to unity. And out of that, it's a fascinating history. All these other platforms began to spring up, and over time, virtually all of these platforms began to cater to particular groups of people. So it didn't unite. And one thing I'm seeing a lot of right now is that social media is not uniting people. It's, you have to be purposeful. It can, but you have to be very, very purposeful to use, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat. I don't know what all the other things are. TikTok, that's a thing. Whatever these things are that you're using, it's easy to, especially in a politically charged time where so much of what we're talking about has implications in other areas, to use the tools that we have that ought to be connecting us broadly with other people, and it's getting narrower and narrower. It's winnowing out people. And I'm really afraid that by the time we get back together face to face, we will have winnowed them out of our lives. So I have real concerns about that trend happening in terms of communication and connection.
Yeah, because right now, because we can't see a lot of people face to face, sometimes for some relationships, even more so now, our only way of being in a relationship is maybe seeing some of the things on Facebook, for example. So yeah, what's that going to look like the first time you do have a conversation with someone that, inside you're building up more of a preconceived notion about maybe who they are, unfortunately, because of this. But yeah, there could be some hard conversations, I guess, over the next couple of months as people start interacting face to face again too.
Yeah. Your first face to face conversation is, why did you block me on Facebook?
Yeah. Yeah. One thing too, and this one kind of, I guess, does relate to the social media or Facebook. You can see, a lot of different thoughts or opinions on, I guess, the aspect of control, just based on a lot of the restrictions. And it's tough. The last couple of months, a lot of different things have been shut down, and for some people, it's very hard to know how to handle that. That a lot of the things they're used to going to the coffee shop or going to the movies or going to be able to watch a live basketball game or a live sporting event together with friends. We're told we can't do that right now. And as humans, we like to have control. We want to, be where we want to be when we want to, and not be sometimes told where we need to be. But there are certain things that should be in our control, and then some things that we should not be controlling. So Terry, if you could maybe, I guess, your perspective on, what can we control, what shouldn't we be controlling, and what things might we be seeing as triggers inside ourselves when we're maybe trying to take control over some of the wrong things in our life?
Yeah, this is a great question, because I think this is going to be at the heart of what's happening right now. Our life, a lot of our life seems to be out of control, but really, we live in a broken world, right, Anthony? So it's the world's always been out of control, and our lives are broken. And but when you have this normalcy, or what we perceive to be normal, we can function very easily. When I was a pastor, and Anthony, you've been on several missions trips, you've probably seen this as well. The very people that you have great relationships with on a missions trip can get bent out of shape in an instant on a missions trip, especially foreign mission trips.
Mhm.
And I've included that in my missions prep lately, in the past several mission trips I go on, and just letting them know what's going on. Because what happens on those missions trips is you remove all the life, all those support systems out of their life. Um, at the end of the day, you get to go home to your house. No matter how stressful it is, you get to go home and be with your family and have meaningful conversations. On a missions trip, you have a conflict with a member on the missions trip. At the end of the day, guess what? You're in the same missions compound with them, and and you have to have this nice face on, this Christian face on all the time, and it's really hard to manage. Well, that's kind of what's happening now. Is for the husband or wife who leaves the house every day and goes to work and doesn't have to deal with some of those conflicts that are at the house. No, it's not happening anymore. Now you have to deal with the conflict at the house, and my life seems out of control. Um, and so then we start to take control of things that we shouldn't take control of. Here's my thing. I love to take control of the silverware in the dishwasher. I love making sure that all the silverware is in a nice order, that all the knives are in one little section, all the forks are in one section, and they got to all be facing up so that the water gets on it appropriately. And it really just turns into a big OCD mess. And then if someone comes in and changes the way I think it should be done, I get bent out of shape and I start to lash out at people. Well, what that really just shows is there's an area of my life that's out of control. And so I start to take control of things I shouldn't take control of. And so I start to make sure that that silverware bows down to my authority. I've done it with my lawn before. I have a beautiful lawn, and I want to make sure those weeds bow down to me. Well, that's not how God designed it. God designed it that I am in control of three things: my own feelings, my own attitude, and my own behavior. Those are the things that I need to be in control of. Beyond that, I have to hand that over to God and to others. Um, so to God, I go to God on a regular basis, morning, multiple times during the day, in the evening. I say, God, here's what you have control of. That's why we tithe. That's why we have offerings. That's why we volunteer, because we say, God, you're going to be the manager. You're going to be the, no, you're going to be the owner of my resources. You're going to be the owner of uh, my valuables, and you're going to provide for me. But I'm going to be a wise manager in that. And then I get feedback from the body of Christ. The feedback helps me recalibrate my brain so that I get rid of that faulty thinking. Because my best friends can say, "Hey Terry, you're getting a little controlling right now." Because sometimes I don't realize that's happening. I just start doing it. Early in my marriage, it was a bad idea for my wife to confront me on those things. Now, because I'm more teachable, more humble, not the humblest man in the room. I'm not that guy, but I am more humble. Uh, I'm more open to her feedback in my life. I'm more open to my kids' feedback in my life when they start to see that I get bent out of shape on different things, and I'm more open to that because I realize the things that I am in control of is my feelings, my my own attitude, and my own behavior. One illustration of how I do that: if I had a stressful day at the office, now this is pre-COVID, um, I'll come home and I know I'm irritable. I'll call up my buddies and I'll just kind of process my day with them. But the second thing I do is when I get home and I know I'm irritable, it's called the law of exposure. The law of exposure says this: I'm going to share with my family that I'm just stressed out right now. And I found that as I share that with the family, it brings my anxiety down and it gets me out of that role of trying to control things that I don't need to control. But if I try to hold in those negative feelings, then I start getting controlling of other things. And I get irritable with the kids. I get irritable with Jen. I get irritable with my dog or whatever because my life is out of control. In a way, it's out of control. But the reality is, we live in a broken world, so everything is out of control within us. So I hope that answers that question. If there's anything you want to dig out of that, I'd be happy to go further. Anthony?
Terry, if you had a mic, this would be the time to do a mic drop. That was really good, man. That was really good.
Can we just end it right here, Anthony?
Yeah. I'm going to piggyback just a little bit on what Terry had to say, but I think he probably captured all of the dynamics that I was thinking about. I have been wrestling with the questions you just brought up. What are the things that are in my control? What are the things that aren't? And like Terry said, the thing that is in my control is how I'm going to decide to face the day, how I'm going to decide what I'm going to do with what's been given to me. So I can't control what Governor Whitmer's going to do. Now, I wrote her a letter a couple weeks ago because I had some ideas, but she can do with that what she wants to. I can't control it. I can't control what the federal government does. I can't control what stores tell me to wear a face mask and what stores don't. I can't control which ones will be open. I can't control those things. I can't control whether or not they're doing the proper count for COVID cases. I can't control whether hydrochloroquine works or not. Right? I mean, not only can I not control them, but frankly, my opinion about most of those things is somewhere close to really insignificant.
Yeah.
And so I keep coming back to what I've been trying to focus on is, what does it look like for me to be a faithful presence as a Christian where I'm at? That means in my home, in my church. If now my church happens to be where I work, so that's my business. But if you're working somewhere, what does it look like to be a faithful presence? That's something I can control is, am I focused on God? Am I studying scripture to find out what a Christian would do in this situation? Am I being accountable, like Terry said, calling friends if things aren't going well? Those are all things that God has given me stewardship of and is within my sphere of authority. All those other things, it's not that I don't have opinions about stuff, but man, if those are the things that eat me up, this is going to be a long, long coronavirus experience. But if I can just look around me and go, God has given me the things around me for whatever reason to stewardship in a way that brings him glory. Okay, how do I do that?
Yeah.
Wonder, like, I guess looking at the last two questions that we had, when we see people that are, maybe frustrated with the types of control and we have a relationship with them in some way, whether it's right now through social media or we do interact with them, somehow face to face, but we see them having a hard time with the control or wanting to, say, well, why isn't, XYZ business open? They should be. What's a good way to encourage or engage in that conversation while still, maintaining that relationship with them? And that's the hard part right now. There's so many different opinions out there. And how do you walk alongside someone to maintain the friendship and relationship while still being maybe frank with them if they might be out of line?
Top of head answer, and I use this in coaching every session I do. It's a tool called attunement. Attunement means I'm attuning to the emotions of the other person. Now, emotions are God-given. All of our emotions God has given us. And what's sad is sometimes we try to repress our emotions, especially anger or depression or sadness. We try to deny those or repress those or just not even just kind of pass them on. But we have to integrate our emotions and make them part of our life. Otherwise, it's going to go back to that negative behavior that I mentioned earlier. So attunement, basically what attunement is if I sense what the individual is feeling, I just phrase it back to them. So in your situation, if someone is angry about the reality of the politics of this situation or the sadness of loss of job or loss of finances or loss of relationships, I attune that. And the way I would do that, in fact, let me give you a real illustration. And this, I'm going to share from my 10-year-old, but this works with everybody. So my 10-year-old last fall was at his friend's house, and it was like one of the last warm days of the year, and we're going to head to the beach for that one last activity. So we picked up our kids at their friends' houses. We get in the car and we drive to the beach. Halfway to the beach, my son is crying. And I'm like, what's wrong? Well, I had to leave my friend's house. Now, my knee-jerk reaction is, well, you should be happy because we're going to the beach, right? Doesn't I mean, that's logical and that's truth, but that's not what he needed right there.
Mm-hmm.
So we pulled off the side of the road. I pulled him out of the car and I said, you're really sad right now, aren't you? Because you had to leave your friend's house.
Mm-hmm.
And I paused. I didn't say, but. Everything in me wanted to say, but you should be happy.
Yeah.
I just paused because what's happening in his brain is he's really emotional. He was having a great time at his friend's house and he loves that. And that's exactly what's happening right now with the kids is they want to be engaged. They don't want to be at school for the education. They want to be at school because of their friends.
Yeah.
And so you attune that. You're really sad right now because you didn't get to hang out with your friend as long as you wanted to. And then you pause. And what's happening in their brain is going back to that prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the decision-making process of your brain. And then he says to me, yeah, we were having a really good time, Dad. You know what? I'm ready to go to the beach now. And I'm not kidding. It lasted 30 seconds. Once I attuned him, it lasted 30 seconds before he was able to kick back into decision-making process. And he made the decision, I'm ready to go to the beach. Now, I could have been in the car and yell at him or be frustrated. Stop doing this. Stop being sad. We're going to the beach. You're ruining this for everybody. Or I could attune it. And it doesn't make sense, but it works. Because God gave us these emotions and he wants us to use our emotions and he wants other people to interact with our emotions. And so we interact with them and then they are able to process life and move on to the next thing. But they're not going to move on to the next thing until they process it. That's called integration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, providing a safe space, with a trusted relationship that they can process some of their thoughts. Then, yeah, that's great. Thanks, Terry. Anthony, one thing I know you've been putting out on your blog and on Facebook and doing a video series is, and you pegged a church in the time of the virus. And just wonder if you could share a little bit on maybe why you wanted to put out a series like this and kind of what the response has been from different people, and maybe how is your thoughts been either confirmed or continued to kind of change and navigate as the weeks go by on this.
Well, I have been asking myself more and more why I did decide to do that. Okay, so Tyler, part of my reason was because I wanted to take the focus that I mentioned earlier. What does it look like to be the church? Mm-hmm. And early on, there was a lot of questions about, do you close church? Before all churches generally closed. How should we respond? What does it look like to have fear versus faith? Do Christians walk boldly toward the virus? And what does it look? So I started just looking up in church history what had happened in previous pandemics. And there aren't that many, actually, but there was a couple that were intriguing. And Charles Spurgeon and Martin Luther have both left interesting records of what they did. And then you see what the early church did as well. So that kind of spurred it. I thought I might do 3 or 4 sessions just to kind of explore church history. And it turned into a lot more and here was my reasoning for it. And I'll let the tens of people who have seen this global phenomenon, they could weigh in on whether or not my goal was accomplished or not. What I was trying to do was separate politics, was to separate anything outside of, this is the Bible and church history. Mm-hmm. How do we walk into the kinds of things that are coming up? So that was my primary goal. What I found was I think we live in a time where it is really difficult to separate what the Bible or church history has had to say about something from where political parties have aligned themselves today. Mm-hmm. And it felt like almost everything was perceived as political, when the reality was I did zero political research. But it turns out the Bible is addressing all kinds of things about life, right? Isn't that the claim we make, that the Bible has relevance to everything? And so it made me uncomfortable, some of the conclusions I reached. I know it made some other people uncomfortable based on the feedback I got. But I was running it by my friends and trying to wrestle with the response as well, because I realized I have a tendency, and I won't speak for anybody else, but I think it applies to everybody else. I have a tendency to view the world through a political lens if I'm not careful. I have the tendency to view the world through my lens of autonomy. I want the things that I want. I have these default ways of viewing things that when I really open up Scripture, it turns out Scripture does a mighty fine job of challenging me. And even if I arrive back at where I was to begin with, I might see something in Scripture and I go, oh, it looks like I got to wrestle with this. And I might realize by the time I'm done, okay, I think I'm good with where I was. But more often than not, it moves me at least somewhere new. And so that's what I've been trying to do with it. And I don't know, like I said, someone else should be the judge of its effectiveness or not, but it keeps me focused on Christ and his kingdom because I am the kind of guy who can get really distracted by what the empire has to say. And I want to stay focused on kingdom stuff.
Mm.
Yeah. And Anthony, I know you've been, or at least I know last week, I think it was, you had a Zoom call with several area pastors. I wonder if you could just kind of share too what's your purpose of trying to have that group together as the kind of Traverse City area moves forward with this in terms of churches.
Another area pastor planned this, and so I was fortunate to be invited. So there was 15 of us, and there's a lot more pastors than that in the region. And I know that there were other pastors who couldn't make it, and they weren't trying to exclude anybody, right? But 15 was probably enough for a Zoom meeting. And so the goal was to just simply try to be unified as we talk about how we're reopening, the way we're going about it, what things we're considering, and if nothing else, trying to foster conversation and openness. Because what all of us are recognizing is that this is a hard time for churches. I mean, if pastors don't know what to do, I mean, we have ideas, right? But hindsight's going to be 2020, and 6 months from now, we're all going to look back at this and go, we could have done something better than we did. So we're all recognizing this as we make plans. The other side is, I mean, you already see it on social media. The churches who open up relatively quickly, it's easy for some people to view that either as they're faith-filled and others are fearful, or for people to really criticize them and go, why don't you care about human life? And the ones that are slow to open are going to get the exact opposite, right? So there's this spectrum within churches, and then within individual churches, every pastor is getting feedback from across the spectrum about what we ought to do. So one of the things that this group is hoping to accomplish is simply we're in conversation with each other. We're learning from each other. In some ways, I mean, it's not presented as an accountability group, like a small group, but I think that's part of it is we're trying to link arms as we go through this. Not that we will all do the same thing, but that we're all being transparent about it and trying to support each other in what we're choosing to do. So it'll be hard, just like everything else is right now, but I think it's a good move.
Yeah, it helps to have a support network, and obviously a time that
Yeah.
church or person have gone through anyway to process with.
Yep.
Yeah, great. Terry, one question directed toward you here at the end. As in the work that you do as a life coach, you focus on the whole health of a person, spiritual, mental, relational, and physical health. And just wondering, obviously all of those areas are important anyway. And during this time, there might be some areas that are lacking more so, or might be shutting down in certain areas just due to different circumstances. So how do you really make sure that in all four areas, especially during this time, that you are aware of your own four areas of health, and also being maybe aware of how others' lives might be impacted in one of those four different areas as well?
Right. Yeah. And I shared this earlier, and I probably sound like a broken record. Do you guys know what records are? Vinyl? Broken vinyl. I sound like
in our house.
Like a broken disc.
Yeah, a disc, broken disc. It's all about relationships. All of life flows through relationships. And if we have our relationships in check, typically the rest of life is going to go pretty well. Now, I mean, we got to be disciplined in life, and eat the right things and in moderation, get some exercise. But if we can make as much of life relational as possible, things are typically going to go well for us. So, your first primary relationship is with our God, our Heavenly Father, and Jesus Christ. Um, then our family, our close relationships, and then you know there's the mental aspect. But your mental stress is reduced so much when you have healthy relationships in your life. When you tend to be in isolation, you get what I call faulty thinking happening. And faulty thinking is where you have the wrong ideas about God, the wrong ideas about yourself, and the wrong ideas about other people. Again, I had a client who has been in some isolation recently. And because of isolation, they started having faulty thinking about what other people thought of them. They started thinking that, well, so and so didn't call me this past week. They must be angry at me.
Hmm.
I challenged that thinking. I said, well, why don't you call them and just see what's happening? They got back to me and said, you know what, Terry, I was wrong. I had that faulty thinking going on. I made assumptions about why this person didn't call me. The person didn't call because they were stressed out about life too. And they just were kind of locked down and had their own faulty thinking. We get faulty thinking about God and what he views us. We didn't get our stimulus check in the mail. So God must be angry with us.
Mhm.
And when life is okay, we would probably never have weird thoughts like that. But when life is very stressed and you're getting stressed, the faulty thinking starts to come out. And so we have to have healthy relationships to bounce our ideas off of, to talk about our relationship with God, to talk about who we are and what's going on in our life, and to hold us accountable and push us on to greatness. Um, and then, yeah, physical health, just getting outside and moving is shown that that has great benefits to your mental health as well. I don't really have anything else to add than if if folks can really dial in their relationships at this time, I think the rest of it's going to take care of itself because you're going to encourage each other to do the other things. So those are my thoughts. And Anthony, I know from pastoral experience and working with you in the past, you probably are seeing a lot of this with your own congregation as well.
Yeah. But before we go there, Terry, what role does bacon play in our overall well-being and health right now?
Is
Can
it
you give us
turkey
the?
bacon or pork bacon? Because if
Oh,
it's
this is
turkey
pork.
bacon, yeah, pork bacon is good. Pork
Okay.
bacon adds to life.
No matter the form, you have it right and everything. I'm gonna
Are
pull
you?
over.
Were
Yeah.
you asking me, Terry, if I'm seeing the same kind of dynamics in terms of how to promote health within my congregation?
Yeah, promoting health, but also seeing some of that faulty thinking within your church
Yeah.
family.
Mm.
Yeah, and you're like, where's this coming from? But it's probably coming from the isolation. Have you seen that coming up with
Yeah.
some of your church family members?
Yeah. I've noticed
Can
like
you
just
name
as
names as well? Can you name
right.
names?
Yes. In fact, I'm going to give contact information. No, I had a great conversation this last week with someone who I don't know if I've seen him since the start of the whole stay-at-home thing. Someone from my church, and there was some tension over something that I had said that they wanted to talk about. And so we met face to face, and it was fabulous. It was just this great hour. And there's that dynamic of being together. And
Yeah.
I mean, you know what it is. It's not the same as simply seeing a face on a screen or hearing a voice on a telephone.
Mhm.
There's something about presence that makes a
Mhm.
huge difference. And yes, I think isolation gives us and generally gives us a negative trajectory, and that's not anyone's fault. It's just we're not designed to be in isolation, as you pointed out. Excuse me, we're designed to live in community, and you can tell it in times like this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
I'm gonna pull over one of the questions that we got on Facebook here. Craig's got, if we find ourselves having to face another lockdown because of a resurgence in cases, what advice would you give people? I mean, right now, like, when the news comes out that, there's some, more lifting of the restrictions for this weekend and spirits are getting up and everybody's like, okay, here we go. And if it goes back, which they say it easily could, it's going to kind of bring us maybe back into some of that initial, like, the control aspect, like we talked on before, of they're going to come, the control is going to be back in there of different restrictions in place again, and maybe how do you prepare for knowing there could be restrictions lifted, but also be an awareness of, I have to be ready for, again, the mindset if they do go backwards as well, that we don't just get caught off guard thinking we're through this.
So first of all, I would definitely buy all the toilet paper. I would be number one.
Yes.
Okay, so Tyler, thought has been in my mind, and probably because I've been working on that global phenomenon, Church in the Time of the Virus. And that's this idea that this is an opportunity for us as a church to really be a witness. So let's say we take a step backwards. We open up. I saw the governor just released something again this morning, I believe, that's opening up some more things. Let's say 3 weeks from now, she goes, okay, we're taking a giant step back. Okay, I want to know which group of people in Michigan are going to be characterized by peace, by civility, by a calm in the midst of the storm. They're not rattled, they're not shaken, they're not angry. They're accepting of this, and they look at what's been given to them, and they're determined to be a faithful presence, so that everyone else in Michigan looks around and goes, where do you get that peace? Where do you get that calmness? And why are you thinking of generosity first? Like, the first question you're asking is, okay, who's going to be in trouble? Who can I help? And I'll be honest, I don't think that's the reputation the church has right now in the United States. I think in some ways we're seen as fomenting the problem, whereas throughout church history, churches in cultures, and this hasn't happened all the time, but especially in the early church, and then I would argue where Christianity has existed in cultures where it was on the outs, it was not in a position of any kind of power or authority, but was often persecuted. The church invested everything they could into building their reputation, because they knew the times were going to come where the cross was going to be a stumbling block and going to be an offense and was going to cause problems. Their stand for the gospel was going to cause problems. They were determined to be the citizens that were model citizens as much as their conscience allowed. What's the verse? As much as is possible, live at peace with all people. They were determined to do that, not because they were weak or passive, but because they were planning ahead. There will come a day where we're going to take a stand on things that people aren't going to like. And they're going to look at us and either say, oh, these are those rabble rousers, those jerks. Or they're going to go, oh, man, that's a quality group of people. I'm going to think twice about pushing back at them too hard. And so I see the time we're in now and the almost certain times that we're going to step back as times for the church to be the city on a hill that really models what the presence of Christ looks like in the world.
Talk about a mic drop earlier. That could be another one right there, Anthony.
Boom.
Yeah, I think that's huge. We talked about that earlier about our faithful response, despite any controls that are being taken away from us. And it would be the same if a resurgence would happen and more restrictions are in place again. It's a matter of what is your faithful obedience going forward, despite things that might be happening outside of our control. So yeah, thanks for sharing on that, Anthony. Terry, Anthony, any other last words or things that you've been processing on before we close here?
Can I address another question that I see on the side?
Yeah, definitely.
What's been the most surprising social outcome or activity you've identified, good or bad, during the lockdown? Okay, so I'm going to finish this thought with a ... and pass it on to Terry to see if he has any thoughts on this. I'm finding the whole discussion of masks right now to be fascinating. It has become the symbol of, I'm not sure what, but it has become a loaded symbol with far more invested in it than simply stopping breath. And I'm really curious, the longer this goes on, and if we keep taking steps backwards, where that's going to go. And I don't know where to go with it at this point, other than I told you guys earlier, I'm really excited about a custom mask I just ordered that I'm looking forward to wearing in public. So this needs to last for at least as long as until I get my order in the mail. But I don't know. I feel like this is the kind of symbol that's going to be revisited sociologically.
Hmm.
It it's almost like the flag represents America. What's this mask representing? Is it representing tyranny? Is it representing taking away our freedom? Is it representing love? What is it representing?
Hmm.
And it seems like as many people as you talk to, there's that many different things it represents. I didn't expect it to become the flashpoint that it did.
Yeah.
Terry, any thoughts about that?
Several years ago, before we moved to Traverse City, we were at a church that required the women of the church to wear a prayer covering.
I grew
And
up in that kind of church.
okay, well, maybe you can. I have some thoughts on
I do
that.
too.
And um, so when Jen and I got married, they wanted her to wear a prayer covering to church, and to we had these events called a prayer feast or a love feast. And a love feast was basically what we would do in our Protestant churches here as a communion service, but it was a little bit more involved. We did a foot washing and different things, and they really wanted Jen to wear this prayer covering. And I was an elder at the church at the time, and I kind of challenged the church on that. And we had a really good discussion on it. It was a healthy discussion. And here's the point I brought up. The prayer covering goes back, the biblical teaching on prayer covering, and correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony, because you come out of a church that had this, comes out of the teaching in First Corinthians. And First Corinthians is written by Paul. There's another passage of Paul's where he talks about women's attire within the church, and that's the church of Ephesus, where Paul is talking to Timothy, and he doesn't mention prayer coverings. So as I'm talking to this church, I'm like, I get why Corinth needs to have prayer coverings. There's 1,000 prostitutes to the temple in Corinth, and if a godly woman, a woman who has come maybe out of that culture, is wearing a prayer covering, it's going to set her apart from um, what the culture is.
Hmm.
Um,
And it
Yet,
grants automatic honor and respect if she wears it.
yes. Whereas in Ephesus, Paul doesn't mention it as a requirement. He doesn't mention it at all. And if it's that important, I said to the church, if it's that important, don't you think that he would have said it to Ephesus as well? And so we came to an agreement that for normal church service, you don't have to wear the ladies don't have to wear a prayer covering, but as an aspect of honor and submission at the love feast, we have no problem of doing that. And we had this conversation, and that's partly based on the other thing that Paul taught on is meat sacrificed to idols. Do I eat meat sacrificed to idols, or don't I eat meat sacrificed to idols? And Paul was like, you know what? At the end of the day, I know these idols are nothing compared to my God. But if it's going to offend somebody, I won't eat meat sacrificed to idols. But if I'm in a household and someone offers me meat that they bought from the meat market that was sacrificed to idols because they got it on a discount or whatever, it doesn't going to bother me either, because I know that God is nothing. And so, kind of my perspective on this whole thing, I really do see that as well, because I hear the stories. People call me up. I have clients that are bent out of shape about the face mask. I have other folks that are like, why aren't you wearing a face mask, and getting the dirty looks? Well, you know, for me personally, that's all I can control. I can control my behavior. And so for a time, I will wear a face mask in certain situations. And for a time, I will not wear a face mask in certain situations. But ultimately, it's my decision. And sometimes I have to come underneath the authority of the government and say, you know what? Maybe they have information I'm not aware of. And I just have to trust that. In other situations, I can say, I'm I'm in charge of this guy right here. I'm in charge of Terry. And for me, I don't need to wear a face mask in this situation.
Mhm.
But I have to take all these variables into account and say, okay, what is this about? Is this about me, or is this about me and a bigger community? So that's my response. I don't think there's one right or wrong answer. But in certain situations, yeah, I think people need to wear it. In other situations, use your best judgment. But it shouldn't be a way of being rebellious. That's my thought.
Yeah. Also, I think turkey bacon was the kind of meat offered to idols that no one should eat.
Yes.
Well, hey, Anthony and Terry, appreciate you guys having a conversation about these topics. I know I've appreciated just hearing from you guys, and yeah, just a good reminder of our faithful response and obedience, as well as just the intentionality that we need to be with our friends and those we're in relationship with, but also our willingness to be vulnerable if we are struggling with something and reaching out to somebody. So, Terry, Anthony, thank you again. Our next one next week sometime, we're looking to have one scheduled with Nate Thaler. Nate is a physician in the Munson system out of Kalkaska, and we'll just kind of talk about how the Munson healthcare system has dealt with this and kind of how he sees this going forward, the impact on hospitals. So thanks for watching. We look forward to seeing you guys next time too.
Sweet.